Go ahead.
This is the Song of Songs, which from our tradition is the love of God of the Jewish people. That's what this is all about.
We call that the Song of Solomon.
Right.
Right.
So understand one thing. Those of us who are in the world of journalism, who have had the opportunity to study the Palestinian Authority's idea, the PLO idea of a state, it is not connected to Judea, Samaria, Jerusalem, Gaza. The concept, the consistent concept, is that it should replace the state of Israel. And when I asked Arafat about those Jews who live in Judea, Samaria, and what's called the settlements in the West Bank, what's their place in your state, he said he has no problem with them. His problem are the Jews who live in cities that replaced Arab villages, Arab towns, and that's what he said very clearly. All the maps of Palestine replace Israel. All the cities, Palestinian cities are called, all Israeli cities are called Palestinian cities. The education system, the new education system, Arafat said there's going to be new school books. So with Arafat's permission, we purchased our agency, Israel Resource, his agency together with the Center for Near East Policy Research, we've purchased all of the new school books. The new school books of the Palestinian Authority, funded through the U.S. and other Western countries who thought they were financing a curriculum of peace, and basically, as the representative of the Vatican told us from their study, the Vatican study, they describing it as war manuals to make war against all of the land of Israel, to take it back, and that's the consistent message. And when they say we want to move the settlements out, most people think we're talking about some hilltop. Mm-hmm. They don't understand they're talking about Tel Aviv, Haifa, Netanya. I'm sure that the rabbis in America don't know that, because their methods of misinformation and disinformation have proven to be very, very professional.
Now I have to ask you, David, what is the solution? Do you think that there can be peace?
To win the war, the Arab League in 1948 declared a war to exterminate the state of Israel. When the Arab League surrenders, an unconditional surrender, then we can talk about peace. It's premature to talk about peace until there's an end of war. Then they're saying, but you make peace with your enemies. Yes, you make peace with your enemies after you defeat them. Israel has to finally win the 1948 war.
So what you envision is a one-state solution, and that state being the state of Israel.
There is no vision yet. First, win the war. There's a war going on. Mm-hmm. You don't talk about solutions until the war is won. When the war is won, let's discuss it. Not yet. It is premature to talk about one state, two states, or anything else. Mm-hmm. First, let's have Israel win the war. There has to be a win-war strategy. And for 65 years, we've had one ceasefire after another with no thought of winning the war. That has to be on the agenda. And people who support Israel around the world can support that idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, in her book Death and Dying, where she did interviews with after World War I of people who had afterlife experience, they all talked about this great light that they saw before being brought back into this world. The afterlife experience and its connection to the Cave of the Patriarchs is what we're talking about here. And the idea of bringing the Jewish people back to life by their presence in the Cave of the Machpelah is what we're talking about today. Very important. Mm-hmm. So people very often talk about the liberation of the Western Wall in Jerusalem and the Old City in Jerusalem. But the same day, Hebron was also liberated. And the liberation of Hebron, they didn't make the mistake that they made in Jerusalem and hand over the keys to the Temple Mount to the Waqf. Here, the Rabbi Goren, who led the army rabbi, he says, no, we're going to take the keys this time.
Shlomo Goren, the one who became the chief rabbi of Israel.
Yeah. That's correct. And that's what we have here today. Very important.
And yet here, which I think is an important point, so you're saying that here the Jewish people maintain control, and yet we still see Jews worshiping side by side with Muslims, which implies that you guys are obviously open to.
Well, let's put it this way. This is the only place in the world that we made a movie called, the Jewish section of a movie called Living Islam, where before there was some violence here a year later in 1994 and 1993, we showed contiguous halls of Jews and Muslims praying. But it is the only place in the world where both Jews and Muslims do pray.
And are we able to get footage of that? The people praying, or is that considered?
It's of them praying in contiguous halls. That stopped after the violence took place in 1994.
Oh yes, of course, yeah, it's all separate.
But basically, the question to ask anyone from the Palestinian Authority or the Arab League is, are you ready to stop your war to liberate Palestine? Simple. Make it easy. That's what I ask the Arab League all the time. People say, how do you do that? I make a phone call.
Mm-hmm.
When I was 15 years old, I grew up in America, although I live here in Israel. When I was 15 years old in 1965, our high school met with William Shirer, who was the New York Times correspondent in Berlin. He wrote a book called The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. We asked him a simple question. Mr. Shirer, how did you get all this material from the Nazis? He says, we asked, and they gave it to us.
Yeah, go figure.
How did we get all of the school books of the Palestinian Authority? I asked Arafat, and he gave me permission to buy them.
Wow.
Not complicated. We have a situation where people don't always want to see the truth. But you know, the difference between our religion and idol worshippers, we say that our God is a God who sees everything, and they have gods which do not hear and do not see. That's right out of course, Book of Psalms.
There you go.
One of the functions of Jewish prayer comes right out of the Psalms. In Hebrew we say, Hine lo yanum v'lo yishan shomer Yisrael. The guardian of Israel will never be in a situation of slumber. Now, there's two versions of what we mean by guardian of Israel. We mean, of course, God, but also those who learn Torah, and that guards our future and our lives. And that's what happens here. There's people here 24 hours a day learning Torah, learning about the Jewish people, learning about the memory of the patriarchs and matriarchs who were here. We're facing right now one of the many Muslim communities here in Hebron. Before the advent of what's been called the peace process, there was no problem taking people through the Muslim quarter. There are Muslim clerics, Muslim business people, whom we have good relationships with. Since the quasi-independence which has been offered to the Islamic authorities here, guests who are not Islam, who are not Muslims, are not welcome. And unless you have a very clear invitation from the Waqf, it's not advisable to walk through there. On the other side of Hebron, in the mercantile district, that's something else. In the Muslim mercantile district, you can do shopping there and all that kind of stuff. That's not a problem, but not here. Not here, which is basically from an Islamic religious point of view, they're not happy to have anyone except for their people there.
Now, David, we were just filming in the Jewish section of the Two-Minute Patriarchs where the Jews go to pray,
Correct.
and everything was fine and everybody's peaceful and happy. But Bert and I asked you if we should go over and film the Muslim side. And
The time to film the Muslim side is Friday, and they don't appreciate being filmed. Simple.
So
I've been there with crews.
So you're advising against it, but we don't want to.
I would say that it would be not advisable to film the Muslim side in prayer, because they would take offense at a non-Muslim coming to film them. When I film Muslims, I do so with a Islamic Arab crew. I have an Arab crew. I'm a journalist, and I film many educational activities, but I do so with an Arab Muslim crew.
Okay, I think we're going to take your advice and pass on that.
Okay.
So very good.
You have peaceful people there. It's a crazy guy.
Yeah.
Crazy. So I have two politicians from Arizona. One good guy and one bad guy.
Voice it all, which is the point. I want to capture what it's like standing out here with the Muslim cultures. Boy, those things are loud.
Oh yeah.
Isn't that something?
Not about a day.
So they get louder by the day, is that what you said?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'll bet.
I want to make sure that.
حي على الصلاة حي على
So, Vernon, you going to start singing along?
No.
No?
This is why everyone here is uptight. They gotta listen to this.
The word Ark of the Covenant.
So we just finished lunch, and I was telling David about the Ark of the Covenant being hidden underneath the Dome of the Rock. So we're researching that on Google. Fun stuff.
And then like Temple Mount. Like the word temple, please. Temple Mount.
I'd already hit the search.
These homes were destroyed in the 1927 earthquake and never repaired.
Oh yeah, I heard about that. So we're headed back to the bus stop and on to our next place. And I'm making Vernon carry my bag, and David's dragging his. And but
no,
you
wait,
know, my hands are full. What am I going to do? You know. Looks like an Arizona cowboy right there. What are we doing?
So on the left side, you're going to hear a place called Beit Shalom. Beit Shalom was one big building. It was a 5-year fire over the State Department tried.
So we're completely in the Arab section here.
And so the State Department is trying to prevent Jews from coming here.
Yeah. So the bus that we're on, obviously, it's a Jewish driver, Jewish passengers. That's complete.
This over here on the left is Beit Shalom.
Okay.
And
It looks very lovely.
Jews are moving in here. But the Jews here is one of the ways to protect the
How so? What do you mean?
by having Jews on the way, there's less chance of a Arab attack on the house.
I don't understand. What is that?
Jews here.
Oh, because if they're here. I got you. Okay. I understand. Okay. So right now we're driving through Hebron, and this must be sector H1, obviously.
That's right. And now we're about to go through Hebron with the Russians.
Okay. So H1 is the section of Hebron which is controlled by the Palestinian Authority. That's about 80% of Hebron. Okay, so now we're entering into H2, which is controlled by the Israeli government, and this is about 20% of the city of Hebron.
Actually,
Wow, that is. How big?
the actual area where Jews are is 2% of the city.
2% of the city of Hebron. Okay.
A lot of what people don't understand is that 98% of Hebron Jews can't play
90% of their own Jews can't even walk through. Is that what you said?
That's right.
Okay.
We want to tell our audience that we're in a bulletproof glass.
Bulletproof bus, yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah. Makes me feel better and worse at the same time.
A man who was murdered 2 weeks ago. His car was not bulletproof, and he was murdered.
Wow.
They were passing his home on the right here.
On the right, okay.
And he was just from the mornings with him. Behind the building over there.
Right there. Okay. And this just happened 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, the day before the Seder. Yeah.
Wow.
He was shot with his wife and 5 kids.
The day before Pesach, you mean?
That's right. He
The
was
Seder.
murdered, and his wife was injured, and 5 kids.
Oh, do you know what? I read about that on the internet. I know what you're talking about, yeah.
We were talking about a protected bus at the time. We're going by the home of a man who was just murdered by Arab bullets.
Because he was in a bulletproof car.
That's
Wow.
correct.
Yep. This is real life here. Okay. Yeah, it's just for my own reference, yeah. I don't know about this.
President Obama is right now implementing the Reagan Plan for Israel.
It's good drama.
The Reagan Plan, September 1, 1982, demanded that Israel conduct unilateral withdrawals, and that was it. The other bookend of the Reagan administration, December 15th, 1988, was the unilateral recognition of Yasser Arafat of the PLO, and demanding that PLO be defined as what? A peace organization that supposedly recognizes Israel. The two bookends of the Reagan administration made the Reagan administration the most dangerous for Israel. You know why? Because he loved Israel. The biggest problem for Israel are people who love Israel. That's the problem.
Really?
Now, fortunately for us, fortunately for Israel, Obama is not a good actor. He doesn't show that he loves Israel. Therefore, he's the best thing that could happen to Israel. A genuine, obnoxious fellow who doesn't really like us. Who knows who he likes? Doesn't matter.
But we know it. He shows the stripes.
But again,
No one falls
your
for it.
grade B actor, Reagan, he was the most dangerous president for Israel because he gave the impression that he loved and cared for Israel. So when he wanted to push the Jews in the sea, he did so with a big smile. And McCain, with Joseph Lieberman, the Jewish senator who
Yeah.
orchestrated the
Jewish.
No, he's completely Jewish.
Yeah.
But his loyalties are elsewhere.
Yeah.
And when he orchestrated U.S. congressional support for Israel's expulsion of the Jewish communities of Katif, we understood where he stood. And we know that a McCain administration would have sent over Lieberman with a smile on his face and said, you know, it's good for my fellow Jews for Israel to move into a suicidal... He wouldn't say that, but that's the whole point. And having obnoxious people is much better for Israel. The best situation for Israel 22 years ago was when we had James Baker III, who was always pressuring Israel and all that kind of stuff.
Secretary of State under Reagan?
No, under Bush 1.
Oh, Bush 1. Okay, of course, yeah, I remember.
And Clinton was almost as bad because why did he love Israel? Well, he loved us to death.
You know, speaking of which, we got the camera rolling here, so I want to hear this. I'm really curious. George W. Bush, the second Bush in office, at the end of his term,
Sure.
I don't remember if it was Prime Minister Netanyahu who made the comment, but someone said George Bush is the best friend that Israel's ever had, or something along those lines.
Totally ridiculous.
Yeah, because it was Bush that pushed for the withdrawal of unilateral withdrawal of
And
Israel from Gaza.
Not only that.
Look at the result.
I, as a journalist, covered an event with George Bush in September 2005. And at that event, he was crying over the fact that the Arabs burned down the synagogues in Gush Katif. However, he added something which was amazing. While he was crying about the burning of the synagogues in Gush Katif, at the same time, George W. Bush was saying, no, you got to withdraw from the West Bank, da-da-da-da-da. This guy, and I covered the Annapolis conference as a correspondent for the Philadelphia Bulletin, a newspaper that unfortunately went out of business. And there we were, with demands made by George W. Bush and Condoleezza Rice that Israel establish a Palestinian Arab state. It didn't matter that it included Hamas. And the whole business of including the Hamas in the Palestinian electoral process was dictated by the George W. Bush administration.
And how much influence do you think George Bush really had on that decision?
It was his decision, but his Condi Rice worked for him.
Right.
Very clear.
And we know the results of that. Gaza's been firing rockets into...
And the person we blame for that is Condoleezza Rice.
Yeah, Secretary of State under George W.
Absolutely.
Bush. Right.
But she said they have to have a democratic election, and having these thugs run a democratic election and win the democratic election.
And who they vote in?
In January 2006.
Yeah. Okay.
And she objected to Israel firing back. But I want to tell you something. There are those who say we're supposed to turn the right cheek. Not in our religion. No way.
Yeah. Well, you can't. You wouldn't exist as a
that's
people
the point.
anymore.
We'll turn the right machine gun.
Yeah. Right.
That's about it. No, sorry.
You have to survive.
No, that's the whole point. We have to fight back and win. Not to repeat myself, but we have to win. And those of us who want us to be, Stephen Fletcher kind of roll with the punches. Sorry, you roll with the punches, not us. Thank you. See, the point of Israel is to be able to say no. The American government in 1948 did not recognize Israel's hegemony over the Negev. Israel said no. The American government in 1948 did not recognize Israel's hegemony over Jerusalem. Israel said no. Now, the best interview I ever had as a journalist was with Yitzhak Shamir, Israel's prime minister from 1983 to 1992, with the exception of 2 years at Paris. Mm-hmm. In 1993, I interviewed Shamir. I asked him, how did you cope with the Reagan plan, which was so antagonistic to Israel? He said, we said no. And how did you cope with the Baker plan? We said no. And how did you cope with the PLO, the demand that Israel recognize the PLO? We said no. And when we said no, they understood no. That's it.
Yeah.
That's what Israel's all about. And I hope that while you're in Israel, you get to see the Museum of the Underground Fighters, open every day between 10 and 4. And you'll see where the Brits kept young Jews who had the goal to say no to the British occupation of Palestine. Mm-hmm. Nothing was worse than the Brits. You know why? Because they were gentlemen.
Yeah.
The Germans were murdering the Jews, and the Brits were closing the exits. And in criminal law...
Yeah, what was it, the Munich Agreement? Peace for our time?
That's right. What was worse was the white paper that the British imposed to stop Jewish immigration to Palestine, despite the British mandate, which guaranteed the establishment of a Jewish national home. To understand that the British, the British committed an act of a war crime against the Jewish people in a very real way. Mm-hmm. Now, in criminal jurisprudence, if someone lights a fire into a movie theater and somebody else closes the exit, whom do you indict?
Yeah, well,
you indict both of them.
Both of them, yeah.
So the Germans and the Brits indicted by the Jewish people for mass murder.
Yeah.
And the British, you noticed that the sun set on the British Empire when they turned their back on the Jewish national home.
Yeah. I mean, by 1945, it was done. The U.S. stepped in that role, so.
They didn't have to lose it, but they did.
Yeah.
They did very nicely.
Yeah. Okay.
And let's just say one more thing in terms of...
Sure.
How Israel survives in all this. 6 million Jews surrounded by 300 million Muslims. One of the key aspects of Israeli survival is Israel's ability to make alliances with Muslims whom it can deal with. And not all Muslims are at war with Israel. As we like to say, I'll do it by analogy. When I was a little boy of 10, it was the year of the Eichmann trial, and we started understanding what happened to the Jews in Europe. My uncle was serving in the counterintelligence corps in Germany, of the U.S. Armed Forces. And he came back and brought me a little German train, HO train. my first question was, is this one of the trains that took the Jews to the concentration camps? To which he answers, you have to understand, David, every Nazi was a German, but not every German was a Nazi. The same thing with the Muslims today. We very could understand that perhaps almost every terrorist is a Muslim, but not every Muslim is a terrorist. And the key to Israel's survival is finding Muslims with whom it can make alliances. And everyone understands that we can do that, and that's what Israel's been doing all along.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned to you privately, when our agency covered the briefing, a congressional briefing for the Pope's ambassador 10 years ago, what he presented to U.S. congressmen was the draft of the PA Constitution. And what did that draft show? It showed a Sharia law, not a Sharia law from Bangladesh or Indonesia where he'd been before, where there's a tolerance of other religions, not a Sharia law from the Morocco and Tunisia, which allows other minorities, but a Sharia law which does not allow juridical status for anyone but Muslims. And that's what's important to understand in terms of what Israel's up against. Again, this is David Badin reporting today about an Egged bus coming out of Hebron with the Israel Resource News Agency, the Center for Near East Policy Research, and for the state of Arizona.
Very good. Excellent. So right now we're driving by an UNRWA refugee camp, and you said that sometimes what happens driving through here is
Children have a reception committee because they get special prizes from their teachers if they show that they hit a vehicle and they film themselves doing it. No kid just went by the camp and it seems that we're doing okay. But we've interviewed teachers and students who talk about the wonders of attacking vehicles on the road. Actually, looking at the time right now here, it's 20 of 3. The school let out an hour ago, so an hour ago may have been the festivity time.
yeah. So we just missed it by an hour,
Yeah, it's going
which is good, but it would have been cool to go on film.
We call it a rock concert.
Rock concert, yeah.
See the UN vehicle?
Oh yeah.
They have to go to take a look at. One is the Peace, besides the Peace Center.
This is, yeah, go ahead and put that, and I'm going to keep this with me, so.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. Gosh,
All right.
you're the best, man. Yeah.
Well, we don't
yeah.
kid around.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're the best.
הם רוצים משהו מהתיקים, הם רוצים להוריד
There's
אותם.
something you need from here?
I put the
You okay? Yeah.
luggage here.
Okay, and we'll keep our backpacks with us, so, and then we'll see you on Thursday.
Yeah.